Now, I don't claim to be the biggest fan of the latest Transformers series, Earthspark. I mean, given that I've loved these robots in disguise since the very start, I'll readily admit that my age group was not the audience Earthspark writers were targeting. That being said, from the outside looking in, I will give it some props for being a Transformers show with some unique elements, for better or for worse, that have not been done in previous series. Least of which was turning this guy into this. I don't know if this is an actual saying or not, but I'd like to think that when it comes to many cartoon properties, they are only as good as the bad guys in the series. I mean, you could have the coolest looking, most heroic acting good guys, but if they have no equally awesome or evil villain to fight week after week, then there basically is no point, is there? And you could call me biased and all, but no decade of cartoons did it best when it came to villains than the 80s. I mean, give me a more despicable lot of characters than the likes of the evil renegade Psykill. Okay, fine, maybe not him. Cool name though. Anyway, sorry. Monstar, Mumra, the Ever-Living, Cobra Commander, Skeletor, and of course, the evil Decepticon leader, Megatron. Okay, I know I've been dodging this story for ages. Not because I've had nothing to say about the Decepticon leader, but because there was a whole lot to say about him. I mean, where do I start with a character like Megatron, who has so much history, so many iterations, and so many levels to his character? We're not talking about a one-dimensional cliché mustache-twirling baddie. I mean, he may have started out as one, but has since transcended into another plane of awesomeness, into, dare I say, an animated icon of the 80s and beyond. So yeah, this is a big story. But instead of going the usual route and trying to cover everything, I figured that it would be best to zero in and focus on possibly the most interesting aspect about Megatron, his backstory. I mean, you could argue that he wasn't born bad, just drawn that way. So yeah, just to manage expectations, the toys and all that, we'll get to that in a follow-up episode. But for now, I'd like to talk about his story and how Megatron got to become Megatron. So as Julie Andrews said it best, let's start at the very beginning, in the year 1983 with the MC-13 gun Robo from the toy line Microman, or to be more specific, the subline Microchange from the Japanese toy company Takara. Anyway, as you oughta know, by this point, this robot that could transform into a realistic 1-to-1 scale Walther P38 pistol was brought over to the US along with a slew of other Microman and Diaclone robots and repackaged into the Transformers toy line the following year. And MC-13 got the prestigious role of becoming the leader of the evil faction of Decepticons, Megatron. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, as far as characters go, Megatron did sorta start out as an almost typical one-dimensional bad guy, with his original tech spec profile describing him as a combination of brute strength, military cunning, ruthlessness, and terror, hell-bent on possessing all of Earth's resources and destroying all the Autobots, before returning back to his homeworld of Cybertron to complete the Decepticon conquest. So, you know, typical bad guy stuff. But even as early as this, his very first basic profile, one specific detail set him apart from other bad dudes of the day, and that according to his motto, Megatron yearns for peace. I mean, granted, peace can be defined in many ways, and his definition is to achieve it through an oppressive and cruel rule, or more precisely, tyranny. But yeah, the use of the word peace did strike me even at a young age as unusual for a villain's end goal. Anyway, as you may all well know, what probably started out in the minds of Hasbro as just another toy line, or Sunbow as just another cartoon, or Marvel as just another short-lived toy-based comic series, turned out to be, well, more than meets the eye, and one of the most successful toy franchises ever. And of course, Megatron has been one of the greatest beneficiaries of this shocking turn of events, as his origin has been thoroughly fleshed out and developed through the years. So with regards to the OG G1 Megatron, I believe the first attempt at a real origin story was told in the pages of the Transformers UK comics. And it starts millions of years before the great Autobot and Decepticon war established in the first episode of the cartoon. As the story starts out, Megatron was originally a much celebrated sports hero, or more specifically, a gladiator. And given our real-world knowledge of ancient Roman gladiators and gladiatorial games, that would connote him being a brutal and savage individual. But as far as ancient Cybertron was concerned, their gladiatorial battles were more of the ceremonial type, an entertainment event wherein Cybertronians could showcase their athletic and acrobatic abilities, as well as their proficiencies with weaponry and such, with actual combat taking a proverbial backseat. It was basically more of a show. But here's the thing. Megatron set himself apart from other gladiators because he was a brutal and savage individual who went the extra mile to make sure that his opponents had their crap kicked out of them, and he actually came this close to killing my favorite future Autobot, Sunstreaker, had it not been for the timely intervention of Iacon's chief athlete at the time, Prime. Sorry kiddies, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the concept of Orion Pax existed at this point. Anyway, Megatron reveled in the violence and carnage that he caused in the gladiatorial arena, and so did the crowds of Cybertronian spectators. And Megatron knew this and used his actions as a means to drum up support from them because apparently Megatron had bigger plans that went beyond the gladiatorial ring. See, this Megatron wanted to establish a vast empire in space, with Cybertron transformed into a cosmic dreadnought, a mobile battle station. And speaking of transforming, it was Megatron and his growing group of followers who first developed the ability to transform, no doubt increasing their popularity with the masses, or at the very least, setting them apart from the rest. And when the time was right, Megatron declared war on the current ruling overlords of Cybertron under the official banner of the Decepticons. And the rest, well, as they say, is history. Now, sticking with the concept of Megatron the Gladiator with grand ambitions of conquest, later Transformers writers took a quick step back to further shape Megatron's character by giving him a reason for his ambition. In other modern iterations of Transformers, most specifically in the IDW comics that started in the early 2000s, before even taking step in the gladiatorial ring, Megatron was an idealist, an intellectual, and I bet you didn't know it, a poet. Anyway, before we go any further, I'd like you to take that idealist part and set it aside for us to tackle a little later on. So yeah, Megatron the poet. But more significant than what Megatron was, though, was the circumstances wherein he existed. In this universe, Cybertron was ruled by a certain Nominus Prime, who despite his title as a Prime, ruled the planet through corruption, social segregation, and general oppression. Under this strict caste system, a Cybertronian citizen's role in life was determined by the body that he was built in, with no space for lowly citizens to make a better life for themselves, especially with the military firmly under the control of the elite to enforce their rule. Unfortunately for Megatron, despite his exceptional intelligence, he was created as a lowly miner, and that would be where he would remain had he passively accepted his lot. Now let's throw in the idea of Megatron the miner in with Megatron the idealist for now. Anyway, on the onset, Megatron did try to be an instrument of change through his writing, focusing on how pacifist dissent and exchange of ideas could change things for the better. Naturally, his ideas did gain traction with the general populace, which slowly but surely took the form of a growing underground movement who propagated and lived by the slogan that they were being deceived by the corrupt rulers of Cybertron, and thus the Decepticons were born. And you thought that they were the ones deceiving us. Unfortunately, this rising unrest did reach the ears of the corrupt Senate, and they were faced with their own Sound of Music moment as they asked themselves, how do you solve a problem like Megatron? While the quickest and easiest way would be to basically kill him, and to be fair, they did give that option a whirl, or more specifically, two whirl. Ultimately though, they did come to the conclusion that ending him would just make him a martyr to his cause. And so they tried isolating Megatron by relocating him to the most remote mines on the planet. And when that didn't work, they even resorted to sending specialized agents to wipe out his memories. Eventually though, after numerous failed attempts, by this point, a very frustrated Megatron inadvertently set off a mining riot when he crossed the line and killed a Senate guard in a fit of rage after said guard had killed a fellow miner who had voiced their dissent against the Senate. After the riot was pacified, Megatron was en route to a prison when he made his escape with the help of a couple of punks, a blue bot named Rumble and a red dude named Frenzy. And just like that, Megatron went off into the great wide open and proceeded to live a life of evading the law and getting over his pacifist ways as an underground gladiator. So yeah, while IDW did take the long way around, we still end up with Megatron the Gladiator, but this time with a proper explanation for his ambitions for raising an army to fight the oppressive society that he was born into. And so despite its violent nature, especially when Megatron eventually makes his move and leads the Decepticons to pretty much decimate the corrupt Senate, you still could make a case for him being a positive agent of change. That is, if you believe that the ends would justify the means. And speaking of the ends justifying the means, as far as my channel goes, the ideal end for me would be millions of views and millions of subs. But well, you gotta start somewhere, I guess. And while I could start a revolution to get my way, I figure I could just simply ask you guys for your help, right? If you've been enjoying this story or my channel in general, help me out and spread the word. Share this story with a friend and have them share it with their friends as well. Let's make my mission of telling stories about my collection, one toy at a time, grow. Onward, my Toyshelfticons! Okay, I'll stop. As always, thank you for your support. So with that out of the way, let's get to arguably the most well-rounded origin story of Megatron, which pretty much ties in all the elements of the past origins into something more cohesive and, in my opinion, more poignant, for the simple reason that it is tied in with the origin of the other side of the Megatron coin, the Autobot leader, Optimus Prime, as told in the 2024 movie Transformers 1. Now, to be fair, the joint origin of Megatron and Prime isn't a new idea, as their paths have crossed multiple times in various iterations of each other's origins. Whether it's a fresh Decepticon leader, Megatron, raiding an Energon warehouse where he gravely injures a lowly worker Orion Pax that forces the hand of Alpha Trion to rebuild him into Optimus Prime, or a police captain Orion Pax arranging for the release of an unjustly imprisoned Megatron, thus unknowingly saving him from a whirl with murderous intentions. Now, given its recency, I'm pretty sure everyone watching this video knows the story of Transformers 1. But for the benefit of those not familiar, let's give this a quick go. The story starts things off with a couple of young Cybertronian miners, Orion Pax and his best friend, his brother from another mother, D16. Yeah, given the name Megatron was coined by Marvel writer Bob Budiansky as a combination for the words Megaton and Electron, with the whole point being coming up with a scary sounding name, it just wouldn't have fit as a moniker for a pretty decent dude who was best buds with Orion. Instead, the writers went with D16, which was the number designation of the original Megatron toy in Japan, Decepticon number 16. I know it does sound rather bland, but I mean, it could have been worse. At least they didn't go with Minitron. Anyway, despite being the bestest of friends, it's established pretty early on that personality-wise, Orion and D couldn't be any more different. Pax was the dreamer, the guy who firmly believed that there was more to his existence than being just a lowly Energon miner. D16, is predictably the opposite, the idealistic miner, the one who believes in just doing a good job as a miner. Do as you're told and things will turn out right. You know the type. And all this brings to mind my favorite band of all time, the Counting Crows, and their epic song, Round Here. I know that this seems like a bit of a stretch, but go with me on this one. See, in the song, the central character is a disillusioned mess of a person who grew up being told by his elders and those he respected that round here, you always stand up straight. We all look the same, and we talk like lions. He is told that doing all this, staying in line, is how he will come to radiate, shine, and carve out a name for himself in the future. But of course, in the end, he comes to realize that all this isn't necessarily true. Life won't always work out for yourself just because you stay in your lane and do what you're told. You have to go beyond that. This is a truth that the character learns a little bit too late and which leaves him confused, uncertain, and scared. D16 is that central character wherein he has fully subscribed to his lot in life as a miner and sees no other purpose to his life beyond it. This is what he is, and this is all he has to do. He's completely bought into the lies that their leader, the glorious Sentinel Prime, has fed him and his fellow miners, that their work, their sacrifice is the backbone of Cybertronian society, and that they endanger their lives every cycle for the ultimate glory of Cybertron. And D16 is content with that. He's proud of that. He's completely drunk on the Kool-Aid. Of course, we all know, or eventually come to know, that this is all a lie, that Sentinel Prime is the true villain looking out for himself, that the minor class are just pawns, sacrificed just like lambs in order to keep the status quo of a false world ruled by a false idol, who in truth betrayed the true leaders, the original 13 Primes, to their ancient enemies, the Quintessons, and who continues to work with the Quintessons by secretly surrendering the precious energon that is mined by D16, Orion Pax, other miners like B and Alita, just to keep him in power. And when D16 realizes this, that his world, his ideals are just one big lie, he is left destroyed. See, unlike his brother Pax, who always believed that there was something more to their lives, this life was all that D16 had. And now, just like the dude in the song, he was left with nothing but confusion, uncertainty, and fear. And you know what they say about fear? As a wise little green dude from a galaxy far, far away once said, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. Unsurprisingly, D16 embraces the anger, is completely consumed by his hate, and swiftly descends into his own darkness. And when given the choice to either save his brother Orion from certain death or kill Sentinel Prime, he chooses the latter. The final nail in the coffin is set when, due to his desire to find a less violent way to fix Cybertron, even at the cost of his own life, Orion is chosen by the ancient Cybertronian god Primus and is granted the Matrix and becomes a Prime, the central concept that D16 has come to hate. And it is too much for him to see his former friend, his brother, become the symbol, the physical representation of his ideal, shattered world, which in his eyes becomes the ultimate betrayal. In the end, D16 takes on the name Megatron after his real-life hero, Megatronus, one of the original 13 Primes that Sentinel had murdered. And he leads a significant splinter faction of Cybertronians who share his belief of being deceived by the regime of the Primes to form the Decepticons. I've said it before and I'll say it again. With all due respect to the 1986 animated movie, Transformers 1 is the greatest Transformers movie, no, story ever told. But see, all of this, the story of how Megatron came to be, is only half the story. Regardless of how he got there, what happens to Megatron after he becomes one of the greatest villains of all time? See, that's the beauty of the Megatron character, in that while you can argue for and possibly see the choices that he made that led him down a dark path as justified, his story doesn't quite end there and actually takes quite an unexpected turn in a couple of modern iterations of the Decepticon leader. The first would be the Megatron from the 2010 cartoon series Transformers Prime, who did share a similar origin to what we covered earlier, but what is interesting about this Megatron is where he eventually ended up. After spending 3 full seasons being the main antagonist to the Autobots, as he should be, towards the end of the series, he's apparently killed off by a Star Saber-wielding Bumblebee. But that isn't the end that I'm talking about, as just like in the 86 movie, this Megatron is revived and reconstructed into a new host by and for Unicron in his bid to destroy Cybertron itself, which turns out to be his arch-enemy, Primus. And Megatron, while conscious, finds himself a prisoner in his own body, unable to stop Unicron. In the end, he is eventually freed when Unicron is defeated by Prime, And while his Decepticons expect Megatron to return as their leader, he had other plans. Apparently, having experienced being a prisoner in his own body significantly changed Megatron. After personally tasting oppression, he no longer wished to inflict it on others. Megatron declared the Decepticon movement dead, and well, peace outs. Leaves, never to be seen again. I remember this turn of events being rather jarring and abrupt, and I'm pretty sure a lot of fans of the show were turned off by it. But looking at it in the bigger picture, I think it planted the seed of the possibility of Megatron actually growing as a character, which ultimately made him more interesting and compelling. And then IDW came along and, well, completely took this idea and ran away with it, as you can say that they pretty much shattered some glass and gave us Megatron, the Autobot. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. So the original IDW Transformers story ran from 2005 all the way up to 2018, which I believe holds the record of being the longest continuous Transformers story told ever. And in those 13 years, I think it's pretty safe to say that they ran Megatron through the gauntlet of character phases, from the pacifist poet to the disgruntled miner, violent gladiator, revolutionary, all the way up to the tyrannical and merciless leader whom we are all familiar with. But I'm sure you've heard the saying that you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Well, that's what this Megatron came to realize. While his story started out as a hero's tale, at least in his mind, of him standing up to overturn a corrupt and oppressive system, in his quest for his idea of peace and a new way, a new order, he had basically become the embodiment of that which he originally opposed. He had become the oppressor. He was the tyrant, an individual that he could no longer continue being. And so, left with no options, Megatron did the unthinkable, willingly surrendered himself to the Autobots, and eventually became an Autobot himself. Look, I get it. This was definitely quite the controversial decision on the part of IDW that didn't sit well with everybody. I mean, I have never been a big fan of humanizing villains in general and finding ways to justify the methods to their madness. And as an unfortunate parallel, the vilification of the traditional hero to give us a more real-world and cutting-edge story. But this is different. This is Megatron coming to the conclusion and realizing just how far he has fallen and strayed from his original, arguably benevolent path. This isn't the corruption of what is good to justify Megatron's mission. This is the opposite, as Megatron himself acknowledges his own fall and failure and his desire to return to what is right. Something I can definitely get behind. And speaking of getting behind something, another radical character development done by IDW that I really loved would be what they did with my favorite Autobot of all time, the one Megatron came this close to killing, Sunstreaker, the sunny Autobot whom IDW turned into a human-hating traitor. What? If you want to know more about that story, I've got it right here. Or if you want other Transformers stories, you can check out this playlist over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope you come back for more.